In other cases, if we do it manually, we need to use select this or create table, those commands. And I think that that's a completely series of videos on its own. So I mean, like, this helps programmers just abstract away the problem of building, learning a completely different, a set of commands to actually set up databases. So yeah, moving forward, we're also importing Flask WTF, which is a Flask form library. Then we're importing WT forms, and from which we're importing string field, password field, submit field, and validators. Like, all of these are very, very important functions. For example, string field, password field in a SQL database, every column that you decide for a database needs to be restricted to the sort of a sort of data type that you're going to use there. So like, these functions, string field, password field, submit field, set those parameters. It's not this data type, it's how many characters, what are the characters that are not allowed, all of that. So you would not need to keep in mind all of those considerations if you just simply leveraged this library. Now, validators, like, again, validators helps check user entries on the HTML forms that we'll create, right? If an entry is missing or entry does not fulfill the requirements, the validator will check that and make sure that is not the case before moving forward. Now, WorkZug security, like, WorkZug is probably a very weird sounding library in Flask, but it's very important because it helps us generate password hashes. So simply, if you, let's say you're a user and you write your username is admin and the password is happy, right? So if someone breaks into the database, it would be very easy for him to just pull up admin and see the password there, right? So to solve this problem and make sure that your systems are more secure, uh, programmers generally hash passwords in some sort of cipher, using some sort of cipher that makes sure that if, for example, a database is hacked, like, and people go and look up admin and the password wouldn't be whatever you type there. For example, happy, it wouldn't be happy, but it would be a very weird sequence of characters which only an encryption key could identify. That adds an additional layer of security, making sure even if the database is hacked or accessed by someone who should not access that, you have another additional security feature, making sure people don't have access to the sensitive information within your application. Now, Flask login is a library that is generally used to leverage the login system within the Flask ecosystem. So I mean, I'm not going to again go in too much detail about it. There's a login manager, there's a user mixin, login user, login required. You'll see the usage of these different methods as we go below. To start a Flask application, this is a standard command. We need to have app equals to flask.name. That's how we initiate a Flask application. Then we need to add a configuration of secret key that makes sure that sessions and just generally it makes sure that if security key is not the same, or basically if the session is not the same, people are unable to access the application. And here we're just using app.config to create a SQL database. Now we're initiating the database using now we're initiating not the database, but we're initiating SQL Alchemy library, creating an object around that. We're also initiating the login manager object, and we're setting login manager.login view equals to login. What this line does here is basically it makes sure that we have a way to identify if a user is logged in or logged out. So that is very important aspect of why this this line is written. Now we're setting up the user model, like pretty standard stuff. Like these are not the places you'll have issues. This is the usage of the ORM. We're using Python to set up the SQL database columns and the requirements around them. And the thing is, like, I've seen ChatGPT construct models fairly well, but like in Flask, I haven't seen ChatGPT to throw a lot of errors in model creation. With Django, there are some errors, but more errors than Flask. But like it's it's something that I would consider ChatGPT is reliable in doing. But keep in mind, you need to make sure that, like right now, we're just setting up a simple authentication feature. But in some cases, like when you know exactly what fields need to be there for registering a user that you need for your application. At that time, you need to add user different fields that you think are important on your own. And it's not that difficult to understand. You can just understand how you can set that up using the existing entries here. Then we're using a login manager user loader, which looks up and finds a user and loads that when we log in correctly. This is the registration form using the Flask form library, and this is the login form using the Flask form library. Now, for every root that we define in Flask, we need to use the app.root classification. You can switch app with any other keyword if you specify it above, but we're just going to stick with application, and I'll suggest you stick with app as well. So app.root. Then we define the root, that is uh, /register. And I mean, you don't need to define this, but uh, there are certain methods within an application, within any web application. Methods basically are the commands or the interactions that your website is going to have with the browser. I think George has a lot of experience in this field, so I'll let him talk about the different sort of methods that are within a web application.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, you have a get. It's pretty self-explanatory. Just an HTTP request to get information from a database. In this case, a lot of times maybe API or a browsable API, right? Or database. Also, you have the post there, and essentially that tends to put information into a database. Sometimes they have it set up, kind of differently. Also, you have the patch method, you have the put method, but that's for a later video. I'll let you go ahead, Mohammed. Thank
In this case, like, if you by standard, if you don't define methods, it's just going to use get. And get is the most common command, as I think George mentioned earlier. Like whenever you open a website, it's going to use the get command, right? For With post, it's more so if you are, again, as George said, if you're saving information in the database or you're sending confidential information uh, through that, because I think this is a small nuance with different between post and get. Like uh, any information you send through get is usually going to appear in the URL. And as you've noticed, when you search on Google, you see what you search in the URL as well. So that usually happens with get. With post, that your information does not appear on the URL, which is slightly more logical if you're saving passwords and so on and so forth. So like we're just initiating the form that we created above here. Uh, we have defined get and post both methods, so we can use post and get methods here, but we can't use the other methods until we allow those methods within this root. And this is the backend logic for the root, which is we're generating a hashed password. Whatever password we got, we hash it. We're using the SHA-256 hashing method. We're getting the user, and now we're creating a new user using user object, and then we add it to the session, uh, and we commit the session, and then we redirect using redirect to the login page using the redirect function, which uses the URL for function to find the login route and lead us to that. So this particular portion or logic runs when we submit the form, because the form is a post request. So then this logic would run. But this logic would not run when you open this route for the first time. It's gonna check if it was a post command. It wasn't a post command, so it won't run this. It would simply go down and render the template register.html. And using form equal form, we are inputting this form within this HTML, which is created by ChatGPT to adjust for the form that we're going to be picking up. But when we submit the form, that's a post request. So in the case of post request right now, it's just using form.validate on submit. So it's just looking for when you submit the form. But one standard practice is to just use request equals to post to identify if it was a post command and run that backend command then. Then there's the login route. Again, I'm not going to go into the methods again. Then we define the login form. If the login form is submitted, we query filter within the database, find the first username by that name. If the user and the hash are first A, available within the database, and B, the password is exactly the same, then it logs in using the login user, it logs in the user and then redirects it to the dashboard route. If it doesn't, we get a flash for unsuccessful login and it tells us to check for username and password. Rendered and again, if this section runs if we submit the form or the post command. But if we don't, and again, initially when we open a page, there would be no post command. So it's going to run render template html dot login.html. So that's simple enough. Moving forward, dashboard, there isn't much difficult logic behind that. If we go to /dashboard, it just renders the dashboard.html template, and we are inputting the current username so that it dynamically welcomes that user right now. That's how ChatGPT is doing it, but that seems fine. Again, this decorator here, apart from the app.root, makes sure that this particular portion is not accessible to people who are not logged in. So if you open the Flask application on this URL, whatever that would be, /dashboard, and you're not logged in, it's going to automatically, and I didn't need to add this logic, it's going to automatically redirect you to the login page because it won't allow you to access that page until you're logged in. So that's what this login required decorator is doing. And logout page is when you log out, it would just, first when it's going to log you out, and then it's going to redirect you to the login page. This basically just starts the Flask application when we run the run command. Now, I think there's one thing that we need to look into before we move forward. So while we have created these models and everything within the, using the ORM for the database, the thing that we're missing here is that we need to make sure that the database is actually loaded, right? I mean, it's actually created. So models do not automatically create the database. So we need to create the database, using a certain command. So you can look this up on the internet or chat GPT with app.app under context. We create all database models that we defined above. So now we can just simply run this Flask application and see if any issue pops up. It seems to be working. Yeah, so we haven't defined a simple home page here, so we need to go to the pages that we defined and the routes that we defined. So we defined the register route, we open that. It seems here we're just gonna create a new user here called let's say random, and we're just gonna have a new password generated here. uh, let's say, or rather we can just write our own password. Click register, save this password. Yep, it's random here. We click login, we logged in, and we click log out. We're logged out and we redirected to the login page. And that was basically a simple authentication implementation in the Flask application. Um, George, do you have anything before we wrap up this video?
No, I think it was spot on. Straightforward, and like I said, when we get into videos regarding like things like Django, or databases, etc. Like we may have a little more level of complexity, but again, I strongly recommend, like, if you're coding in Python, um, and or if you need to do some type of a wrapper, etc. Go ahead and use Flask for small microservices. It's straightforward, and it gets to the point. Thanks.